Hey, you're listening to When Bad Things Happen to Good People, a podcast dedicated to censorship and the arts. My name is Todd Sullivan, and my lovely co-host is Oren Barter.
Hi.
And we are talking about the Autobiography of Malcolm X. Hey, Oren. How are you? Were you just drinking?
I was just drinking it. And I didn't expect to have that little noise come out of my lips.
I wasn't expecting that noise to come out of your lips either, quite frankly. Is it just me, or were we just doing this? It seems like we just did this the other day.
What's that? Oh, yeah. It hasn't been that long since we did the last one.
Yeah. Yeah, we're badly trying to get our schedule back in order again after some delays on the third episode. So,
you know what's really funny though? Is that I'm kind of caught up on the reading, but it wasn't because I remembered that you told me we were going to do one really soon. I was just like, you know what? Last time I wasn't ready. I'm going to get a jump start on it. I'm going to have all the chapters done way before we record the next one. And now I'm just finished reading part of chapter 14 and we're doing another one, and I'm really glad that I had that switch in mindset. Otherwise I'd be fucked.
I'm pretty glad too, although to be fair, we didn't get entirely through all of the chapters that we planned to for this episode because of the really quick turnaround on it. We've only going to be covering chapters 11 through 14 instead of 11 through 15. We didn't quite make it to 15 this time, but
so we dropped a chapter and I still didn't read all of it.
Yeah. Anything new in your life these days?
Lost a little bit of weight. I put on about it started with the quarantine 19 and I think it became the quarantine 25.
Yeah.
By the end of it, and I just decided to kind of cut back a bit on beer, which sucked, and cut back a bit on sweets and do a little bit more stuff outdoors, and I'm happy to say I'm down. I was at 185. I'm at 171 this morning. So,
oh, bravo!
Yeah.
I don't have a scale here, so I have no idea what my weight is like. But I did start intermittent fasting about 4 or 5 weeks ago as a way of treating my diabetes. I'd heard it can do good things for weight loss and for reducing your insulin resistance. And so far it has, it's already been having a bit of an impact. I've been able to dial my insulin back a little bit and still keep my blood sugar down where it should be. So hopefully it will continue to do good things.
Hey, right on.
Yeah. So we're both, taking some steps to hopefully improve our health in these trying, terrifying times.
Go us.
Go us, exactly.
We're like a beacon of hope
in this dark, dark time. Before we get into the meat of this episode, just wanted to throw out a quick correction over something that I kind of misstated last episode, which was that when Malcolm X was first being sort of brought into the Nation of Islam, I had mentioned that it was Ella who had come to him in prison and first sort of started pitching those ideas to him, when it was actually his sister Hilda. Ella actually avoided joining the Nation of Islam for quite some time, although she does eventually join during this section of the book. She was sort of like one of the last ones in the family to give herself up to that religion. I guess she was, a bit more on the stubborn side. But
he also said that sometimes the people who are the hardest to convert are the best converts.
Yeah, that is true. I think he mentioned that specifically in regards to Ella when Ella finally converted.
So I'm assuming that maybe later on in the book we'll see more of Ella's influence or Ella's part to play within the Nation of Islam. Possibly.
Perhaps, but I also get the feeling, just based on the way things are being worded at this point, and knowing the title of the next chapter, that we're going to start seeing some conflict between Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam in the upcoming chapters, the ones that we haven't read yet.
Right.
For now, like I said, we're looking at chapters 11 through 14, which in a lot of ways you could almost call the autobiography of the Nation of Islam. There's a lot of material in these chapters talking about its history, its growth, its founders, and in some places, it almost feels like Malcolm is a supporting character to the Nation of Islam. Would you sort of agree with that?
Well, I would say a supporting character to Elijah Muhammad for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like, and like you say, we don't know what's going to happen later on in the book, but for his time when he became a member of the nation to now, his love and respect for Elijah has been at the forefront, even above his own wants and desires and needs, kind of a thing, right? So he really believes in this man and really wants to spread his gospel. And yeah, I would agree that he's kind of definitely in a supporting role.
Yeah. So looking at chapter 11, which is called Saved, that's sort of his initial growth and education about the Nation of Islam and sort of beginning to spread the word of the Nation of Islam to other inmates. One of the things I sort of forgot to mention about Malcolm X's time in prison in the previous episode that was sort of mentioned in chapter 10 is he started to read a lot. Mm-hmm. And in fact began to sort of try to expand his education. He began taking English programs and penmanship training to improve his handwriting. And then we see in this chapter, he begins to sort of write a lot of letters on a regular basis, either to his family. And then I think it was a letter a day to Elijah Muhammad as well.
Well, I'm going to just jump in there. I'm not sure if he said he took penmanship classes, but I know he felt that his penmanship was bad. And I remember him saying that he just opened up a dictionary and started writing it out. He wrote an entire dictionary just to increase his understanding of words and also to better his penmanship. So I mean,
yeah, he would write out.
How much discipline does that take? Like,
well, I guess when you're in prison though, and you've got nothing but time.
Yeah, I guess so. But still, I mean, that you could just sit around and you don't have to do that. That takes a lot of dedication, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you may be right about the penmanship classes. I seem to recall him saying something about that in chapter 10, but my memory of that could be hazy. So,
okay.
But yeah, certainly he did write out page by page of the dictionary, and then he would read it back afterwards and sort of use that to gradually learn the meaning of new words and on and on like that.
Well, because he said when he started reading, he was kind of just going through the motions, right? Like a lot of words he didn't understand. It had been so long since he had like actually understood a book. I think he dropped out in the 7th grade or 8th grade.
I think he said 8th grade.
8th grade. So how old? Like that's 13, and he's 20, 21 when he starts, or 21, prison, 22. Yeah. So I mean that's 9 years without opening a book, and yeah, he said he went to the dictionary to try and learn the words so that he could start reading with understanding. And that's when his reading really took off. That's how I understood it.
Yeah. And he also got interested in history. Mm-hmm. And through history books and also through the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. And he said that he was quite sort of shocked to learn some of the horrors of slavery, which is interesting to think about because I guess to a lot of us today, the knowing about sort of the uglier details of that era seem obvious to most of us now. But I guess, at that time, it was definitely more suppressed. I guess, obviously the, white people didn't want to talk about how bad black people had it, and it certainly wouldn't have been covered in his school curriculum, which
which
had
was
exactly
one paragraph.
That one paragraph,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so with that kind of information, and with the beliefs of the Nation of Islam, he started to kind of spread the religion in prison, where I think it would probably be fairly easy, and I think he even explains this later in the book, to convert and convince this largely black population that they have been pushed down by white society. Because that's very much sort of the core tenet of the Nation of Islam, as far as I can tell. It's that the black race is the one true race. The white man is the devil who has sort of kept them repressed for all these centuries, and they need to rise up and sort of reclaim their nationhood or their identity, right?
Yeah, I think he did express a lot more about gathering and leaving America. I don't think it was so much about rising and just staying put and being.
Yeah, that is
I think
true.
that was a big part of it was there was, within the Nation of Islam, there was supposed to be a large migration away from
I
the
believe
Western
there
world,
was,
which they considered to be the white man's world, which, I mean, rightly so, right?
Yeah, I believe that was a tenet of their religion, that there was to be a return to Africa. But again, it's all sort of everything happens in stages, right? So first, it's about the growth of the church. It's about reaching people. It's about building that belief, and in doing that, remaining separated from the white society, right?
Yeah. And that was a big thing, and he said it over and over again, how much he despises integration, right? He thinks that people who, like black people who have integrated, they've been, fed some sort of promise or scraps, as he said, from the table. And they, even when he was going through his hustling days, he did not appreciate the black people who consider themselves high society, and which he commented on. They think they're high society because they serve the high society, right? They're butlers, and that's what they've been told is like the upper echelon for a black person, and they're happy to feel that kind of superiority over the slums, kind of a thing, right? And yeah, I think he's never really been a fan of integration. So,
well, there was, speaking of, the word choice of integration and other things, there was a point later in the chapter where, he was, I think it was when he was doing interviews, asked about, why he wanted to segregate people.
right.
And, he corrected them by saying, like, segregation is when one group forces another one to be separate. Where what he wants to do is separate, which is sort of a mutual agreed upon thing. And no one is forcing it on anyone else. It's just, this is what we're going to do.
Right.
So yeah, again, it's not so much about, it doesn't seem to be a message of sort of rising up and defeating the white society.
Yeah, there was
but
nothing
just
about like overthrowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just finding their own place.
Yeah, their own identity.
Yeah.
There was one weird bit in this chapter that I wanted to bounce off you to see what you thought of it.
Okay.
At one point while he's in prison, he talks about having this vision of a guy show up in his cell and just sort of sit there on a chair. He's very well dressed. And he ends up, I can't remember if in that moment or if it's sometime later, but he ends up kind of coming to the conclusion that it was W.D. Fard, who was the guy who actually founded the Nation of Islam, who had disappeared from the face of the earth by this time. I think it was 1934. he vanished. And so far, that vision, any reference to that vision doesn't seem to have come up since then. And it kind of seems, I mean, obviously he was recounting it as something that happened, but I wondered what it might mean in a larger picture, like what he might think that meant.
He did bring it up one other time.
Did he?
Yeah, he did. So when he was talking about, because he brought it up in chronological order. I think when he was talking about his time in prison, he spoke about this dream being visited by this man.
Yeah.
Who wasn't black, but wasn't white, who wasn't red, but he really had no race. He described him as a person who would be accepted by any culture, I think is the way that he put it, or any would be accepted by either race.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right by saying that? Is that true to the book?
I think so. I don't remember.
But he does know and honestly, I can't remember right at the moment when it was, but I do remember him bringing that up again, and it was just kind of like a footnote. He kind of just brought it up, like, in that time that I was visited in my dreams by W.D. Fard.
Speaking of the, him talking to people in prison and spreading the Nation of Islam in prison, there was one part of the book in this chapter that I wanted to kind of read because it kind of harkens back to what he talked about when he was in school and growing up, and the sort of lost opportunity when his teacher told him like he could never possibly be a lawyer.
Yeah.
He writes, "You let this caged up black man start thinking the same way I did when I first heard Elijah Muhammad's teachings. Let him start thinking how, with better breaks, when he was young and ambitious, he might have been a lawyer, a doctor, a scientist, anything. You let this caged up black man start realizing, as I did, how the first landing of the first slave ship, the millions of black men in America, have been like sheep in a den of wolves. That's why black prisoners become Muslims so fast when Elijah Muhammad's teachings filter into their cages by way of other Muslim convicts."
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine it's very true that message to people in that condition, in that state, in that place, absolutely would have a huge impact.
Well, and I think we discussed it in the previous episode too, where, through the game of hustling, through numbers game, or through selling quote unquote reefers. Still love that word, by the way.
Yeah,
I think we're in agreement on that. But how these more immoral, more illegal pursuits offered them a level of financial status that they were otherwise not. It wasn't available to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I mean, these people who maybe desired to be something, had the capacity to be something, to be someone, were consistently shut down, and the only place they could really be someone is on the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when he's preaching this in prison, a lot of these people, yeah, like you say, like maybe not even in prison, but just like West Indian Archie, he talks about him. I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. And also backwards, because he often brings up his ability with numbers and how well he would have done in mathematics if he had, like you say, different breaks.
Yeah, and more support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
totally.
absolutely. Like you say, it's just really, really plays to what they've been through their whole life, right?
Mm-hmm. So moving on to chapter 12, which is called Savior. Malcolm X gets out of prison on parole. He heads to Detroit, which I believe is home of the first temple of the Nation of Islam, with the intention of sort of learning directly from Elijah Muhammad, or watching Elijah Muhammad speak. His brother gets him a job at a furniture store. And he has a few different jobs around this time. I think he ends up working at a GM plant after a while. or a Ford Motor Company plant. But it's mostly about, he's mostly focused on the Nation of Islam. When talking with Elijah Muhammad, the advice that he had as far as sort of how to increase the membership in the church is to go after young people, to recruit young people. He said, recruit them and the older generation will follow. And that ends up sort of being Malcolm's focus. So he starts doing what I don't know if it's a term he came up with or it was commonly the term, but he starts doing what he calls fishing, which is looking for recruits for the Nation of Islam, particularly amongst the young. And he ends up looking quite often outside of Christian churches. I guess the Nation of Islam held their services sort of later in the afternoon. And there was sort of this perfect period between when the churches would let out and when the Nation of Islam service would start, where they could sort of stroll around amongst the people leaving the churches and say, hey, do you guys want to come hear an alternate perspective? Do you guys want to come hear somebody else preach? And that proved somewhat successful for him.
Mm-hmm.
And around this time, too, 1953 specifically, he becomes an assistant minister at Temple Number 1.
Yeah, because he had quite a bit of trouble finding converts at first. He found it quite difficult, didn't he?
Yeah, well, I think part of it was, he would talk about, he would get maybe 7 people in a room and speak to them. Mm-hmm. And I think he had a regular thing where, at the end of his sermon or whatever, he would say, how many of you are ready to join the Reverend Elijah Muhammad?
Well, he would start with, how many of you believe what you have heard today? And then, so many people would stand
Right, yeah,
up.
exactly.
And then he would be like, how many of you are willing to join the Nation of Islam and follow Elijah Muhammad? And then he said he was really disappointed with the amount of people that sat down for that one.
Right. But there was always sort of a steady growth to it from the sounds of it. Like, even if it was only 1 or 2 per night, it was still growing, even if slowly.
But never as quickly as he wanted. He was hoping that, everybody would stand up when he said, how many of you believe what you have been told? And, I'm sure he was very disappointed with the growth, the slowness of the growth.
There's sort of a period here in chapter 12 that goes a little bit into some of the specifics about the early years of the Nation of Islam, about W.D. Fard, who is this very kind of mysterious figure. He shows up in, I believe, Detroit, kind of with no history, claims to have been from the East, and starts kind of gradually teaching people this kind of modified version of Islam. And I had some notes here on some of the things that he said about, his religion, about the Nation of Islam. There's no heaven and no hell. Those were conditions in which people lived on the earth. And specifically, black men had been in hell for 400 years. And W.D. Fard had come to return them to where heaven for them was, which was back among their own kind in Africa. And he also said that he was what was called the Mahdi, who is a prophet that will rule before the end times, according to some Islamic religions. As I understand it from my quick Googling, some Islamic religions believe in a Mahdi, some don't.
Okay, now did he specifically say that he was the Mahdi?
Yes.
Okay.
Hang on, I'm looking for it now. Oh, yeah, okay. I asked him, said Mr. Muhammad, who are you and what is your real name? And he said, I am the one the world has been looking for to come for the past 2,000 years. I said to him again, said Mr. Muhammad, what is your true name? And then he said, my name is Mahdi. I come to guide you into the right path. So he, at least according to Elijah Muhammad, confessed to being the Mahdi. This is one of those cases quite often with religions where you have claims being shared as secondhand information. Right. So whether or not he actually did say that he was, or did, try to claim to be that, or whether that was something perhaps the Elijah Muhammad invented after the fact to, increase his standing as the founder of the Nation of Islam. I mean, who knows, obviously.
Well, because it says that W.D. Fard makes him supreme minister of the Nation of Islam before he disappears.
Yeah. And then he just disappears. And no one, I guess, knows whatever happened to him. So, and I noticed something, too, that I wanted to read because I thought it was entertaining. But we kind of skipped over the fact that, because I briefly thought it wasn't super relevant, and it may not actually be that relevant. But during this period, the FBI comes to inquire why Malcolm X is not signed up for the Korean War.
Right.
He claims that it was because he didn't think they would take convicts, which he knew wasn't true, but they believed that he didn't know and that he thought that. But I thought his comment, because he went in for the draft, signed all the documents, but when he signed up as a Muslim and as a conscientious objector. And there was this bit from the book that I liked. They asked if I knew what conscientious objector meant. I told them that when the white man asked me to go off somewhere and fight and maybe die to preserve the way the white man treated the black man in America, then my conscience made me object.
Yeah. Yeah, that was...
Which is a pretty concise argument.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they marked his case as pending, and he never heard from them again. But it was one of those things, too, because I think when he was younger, there was his first draft for, I guess it would have been World War II, that he went in and played crazy and didn't get called in.
Yeah, it was like, if you give me a gun, I'm going to use it on the whites. I think it was what he said, yeah.
But the concept in both cases were the same. Like, here are circumstances where, you've got the, black people in America had already been exploited over and over and over and over again by white people. And now here was white society trying to force black men to go and die on their behalf. Right? Like, none of those black people ever wanted or ever asked to be part of American society. And now here they were being asked to go and end their lives to defend the very society that had exploited their families for generations. Just kind of boggles the mind. So moving on to chapter 13, Minister Malcolm X. He begins to kind of travel around a bit, and he gets sort of sent out to start new temples in cities where there aren't any. So he's first sent to Boston, and by now he's a full-time minister in the Nation of Islam. He's left the furniture store and the Ford Motor Company and whatever else other jobs he's had at that time, and has now dedicated himself full-time to the Nation of Islam. He goes to Boston and starts a temple there. He goes to Philadelphia, starts a temple there, then goes to New York, where he works to start a temple there, and goes to sort of reacquaint himself with some of the people that he'd interacted with in the past, like Sammy the Pimp and West Indian Archie. Sammy the Pimp, turns out, had passed away. West Indian Archie was still around, but not doing well.
Yeah, he was quite old at that point, I think.
And from the description, too, it seemed like he was sick. But they did have kind of the opportunity to get past the issues that they had in the past over that, $300. And And they both kind of admitted that, maybe I was wrong. I don't know. Maybe you were wrong. Maybe I was wrong. I don't know. It doesn't matter anymore, right?
Yeah, I found that really interesting because at the time, obviously, that was the number one thing in his life. He was going to kill West Indian Archie, or West Indian Archie was going to kill him, and that was one of the big reasons for him to leave Harlem. And I think he even says that to West Indian Archie. He's like, if it wasn't for our fight, our hatred of each other, I wouldn't have left, and leaving saved my life, I think is what he said. Yeah, it was just, that was I think a really important thing for both of them to be able to get that kind of off their chest, because I think they both said that neither of them wanted to kill each other, really, but they kind of felt like they had to. And like a very different point of view from how many years? Like 10 years ago or 9 years? He was in prison for 9 years, right?
Yeah, and I guess he probably wasn't in Boston for that long. Maybe a year before he was arrested. So it's 9 or 10 years.
Right. Yeah, no, I did really like that interaction that he had with West Indian Archie.
Yeah, and it was good to see them, get past that thing. And
go ahead.
No, just having the opportunity to do that, because obviously he didn't have that opportunity to sort of have any final interactions with Sammy the Pimp, right? So it's always nice to have some kind of closure with people before they've passed away.
And I think, like you said, he tried to, kind of put the feelers out for Archie's. He did express his love for the Nation of Islam to Archie, but he felt like he wasn't going to get a convert out of him, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But he did express to Archie again, which he said a few times in the book, what if you had put your talents to work in the field of mathematics? And, Archie was kind of like, what if, right?
Yeah.
And I think he said, neither of us said that it was never too late, because they both kind of realized that he was, nearing death's door. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it was I really did like that interaction.
Mm-hmm. At about this point in the book, it kind of drifts into some specific looks at elements of the Nation of Islam. One of the things that he spends some time writing about is the code of the religion, the things that they are not allowed to do. And I did want to sort of read these things out because there's a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And I think he even sort of concedes that one of the challenges that he faced in getting converts is convincing people to agree to these things, right? So here we go. Any fornication was absolutely forbidden in the Nation of Islam. Any eating of the filthy pork or other injurious or unhealthful foods. Any use of tobacco, alcohol, or narcotics. No Muslim who followed Elijah Muhammad could dance, gamble, date, attend movies or sports, or take long vacations from work. Muslims slept no more than health required. Any domestic quarreling, any discourtesy, especially to women, was not allowed. No lying or stealing. No insubordination to civil authority, except on the grounds of religious obligation. That is quite the list.
That's some strict ass shit right there.
Yeah. I do wonder what's considered a long vacation from work. Like, can you take, like, a long weekend is okay? Like, is a week okay and 2 weeks is too much? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, whose discretion was that up to? I guess the minister, right? Because he did speak about, like, his brother was kind of excommunicated from the Nation of Islam, wasn't he? You know what? I'm not sure if it really said what he did, but Elijah Muhammad had excommunicated him, and
Malcolm comments that he was excommunicated for doing something that they would later find out Elijah Muhammad had been doing.
Right. Yeah.
And I do think it was like, I think his brother was screwing around with the secretary at one of the temples, I want to say.
Because, okay. Because fornication was, that was like one of the first ones, right?
Yeah, no fornication.
No fornication. Maybe.
And no dating.
First, yeah.
So you can't even accidentally get close to fornication.
No dating?
Yeah, no dating.
Holy shit. Okay.
Could not dance, gamble, date, attend movies or sports, or take long vacations from work.
Wow. How do they find anybody?
I guess you do it like Malcolm does.
That's like all the things I like to do.
Which I guess, we're about to get to the part in this chapter where Malcolm gets married. And I guess we might as well just talk about that right now, because it kind of lines up a little bit with some of these things that he can't do, because his engagement kind of comes out of nowhere.
Right.
He ends up, so while he's working at the New York Temple and working to grow the New York Temple, he meets Betty X in 1956. At this point in his life, he didn't really want to settle down, didn't want to deal with women. He confesses in the book that he didn't trust women. But I guess he notices this Betty X when she arrives. And, she seems smart, and she seems maybe interesting. And so he starts to kind of check out her classes, but completely platonically.
Right.
And one of the things they mentioned this time, too, is that at the temple, there were regular evening classes on things like how to be a proper Muslim wife, or how to be a strong Muslim husband, or they had like martial arts training, I think, for the fruit of Islam, the sort of security that they had. And so he went to some of her classes, and then because he noticed that she was smart and was interested in things, invited her to the Museum of Natural History. But through all this,
but not as a date. Not as a date.
Not as a date. Yeah, it's always like
it was just like, I thought maybe she could get something out of it.
Exactly.
She could learn something. But like, I mean, come on, it was a date. It was a date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then he starts wondering to himself, what if I did get married? Should I get married? And then they talk about certain issues that you have to watch out for when marrying within the Nation of Islam, which is like, there can't be too big a height disparity between you, right?
Right.
One is too tall and one is too short. That makes a bad marriage.
Did they have a specific for like the difference in height? Like there was some really specific points.
Yeah, I don't think they listed a specific difference in height. Like it has to, if anything more than, 18 inches or 6 inches. I don't know. But one specific
because they had to be taller enough that the woman respected the man, but not too much taller as to have a great disparity between the two.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really restrictive, the selection of a wife.
But the one sort of specific guideline that blew me away was the best age for a wife.
Right.
Which is half the man's age plus 7.
Which is something I think a lot of us have heard.
Which is the number used nowadays to calculate what is the youngest girl that you should date.
Exactly, yeah. Any younger and you're being creepy.
Exactly.
That's what they're, yeah, exactly.
So it's such a weird overlap. Like, I wonder... Like, I have no idea where the current half your age plus 7 number came from. It just sort of popped into pop culture as far as I'm aware. Mm-hmm. But is it accidental that, like, these two things are I'm not saying that was necessarily swiped from the Nation of Islam, but it just seems like so weird that these two calculations are so specific. But,
well, I would say, like, if it doesn't come... Like, if it wasn't swiped completely from the Nation of Islam, then at least the reasons for it existing in the Nation of Islam and the reasons for it entering pop culture would have the same route, I would think.
Well, that's what I mean.
It's too big of a
half wonder.
coincidence. It's too big of a coincidence. Just happened, in two completely different situations.
Right. Like I wonder whether or not it has an even older history that we're not aware of.
Yeah.
That maybe the Nation of Islam drew from, and also it allowed it to hiccup into current pop culture again. Because exactly. It seems way too weird that that specific calculation would end up showing up twice.
Or like you say, maybe it sprouted from the Nation of Islam and then was kind of ripped from that for use in, don't worry about it, man. You can date her, divide your age by half and add 7. That's the golden rule.
I mean, I guess unless you're 21, don't do that if you're 21.
Okay, what's 21? What's half of 21? That would be 10 and a half?
10 and a half.
17 and a half?
Yeah,
that's not awful. But okay, let's go
awful,
14. 7 plus 7 is 14. Actually, it kind of works.
Maybe it does work.
It kind of works.
If you're 6, you should be dating a 10-year-old. It kind of inverts itself at some point.
Oh God.
What is mine? I guess.
How old are you?
I'll be 48 in August. So that's
24.
24, 31.
31. Yeah, 48, 31. That doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility. Like what kind of what age discrepancy is that? That's 17 years.
17 years.
Yeah, 17 years.
So I would have been graduating when they were born.
Well, I mean, when you put it that way, it sounds creepy, but
right.
But I mean, a 31-year-old, that's that's an absolutely 100%. That has been an adult for like a decade. So
that's true.
If they're like, hey, Todd, I know I'm only 31, but you're like, okay, cool.
If it's good enough for the Nation of Islam, it's good enough for us.
It's good enough for us.
And so, after kind of struggling with this, he was on the road driving to somewhere. I can't remember where he was driving to. And he just decides in the car, I want to get married.
Right.
Pulls over, gets out of the car, explains for some reason that he didn't even have her number with him and had to call directory assistance to get it. Calls up Betty X and just says, look, do you want to get married?
Which is the weirdest proposal I've ever heard of.
Weirdest.
Most abrupt.
Yeah, it's not just the proposal, but like the whole dating, not dating beforehand.
Right.
Right. And she agrees. And then I guess because he's decided it has to be done right away, he heads to his brother's place and she flies out there, asks him where they can get married with a whole lot of mess and waiting. And again, that was were his words in the book, a whole lot of mess and waiting. He said they should go to Indiana, which they do. Then they get there and they find out that Indiana has changed the law. So then they went to Lansing, where his brother Filbert lived. And they found out they could get married in a day there if they rushed. And this is a lot of mess, but maybe not a lot of waiting, just to get married super quickly. It's a lot of driving, a lot of messing around,
a lot of flying.
But they finally get married, and then there's kind of a time jump in the book because he just very quickly, in the case source of a couple of paragraphs, talks about the 4 children they have, or they had, one by one, when they moved into the house they currently live in. And then after all of that, finally confesses, in a quote, this was his quote, "I guess by now I will say I love Betty."
Yeah, for a marriage, a speedy marriage, and 4 kids later.
I guess I'll admit that
I love her.
He's okay.
Yeah. I could have done worse.
Yeah, and I don't know if it is here that he talked about it. It probably was, but about, some of the, I don't know if it was so much, the way that a Muslim wife should be, or if it was just the way that she worked for him as a wife, as far as, her ability to understand that he was on the road a lot, would sometimes go for weeks at a time without being home. Sometimes when he was home, he he would need to be in his office working, and she respected that and allowed that. And so, I mean, even though the proposal and their relationship early on certainly got a weird treatment in the book, it does certainly sound like they had, a relationship where they meshed properly with each other. They were a good fit, right?
Yeah, no, I think that had more to do with, I don't think that was a specific Muslim thing. I think that was just, she was very dedicated to the religion. I think he had said at one point she was going to college to be a nurse, right?
Yes.
And she had funding to do that through her foster parents. And when they found out that she was a member of the Nation of Islam, they cut her off. So she was doing odd jobs, babysitting, to be able to afford to continue going to school to do what she needed to do, but also being an active member of the church as well. So I think that her dedication to the church really reflected in her dedication to his dedication, her dedication to him regarding his dedication to the church, because I think she understood the sacrifices involved, right? Yeah, I don't think that was really probably the norm. I wouldn't say, but yeah, like you say, they really did. It seemed like when he talks about their relationship and the way they interact, they really were a good mix for each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of this chapter, there is an event which kind of gets the Nation of Islam the most kind of publicity it's had to date, which is when there were a couple of Nation of Islam members who were assaulted by the police. Is that right? I know one of them had their scalp split open.
Oh yeah, how did that? No, it was somebody was being confronted by the police, and these two brothers of the Nation of Islam were watching, were paying attention, and they were told to disperse. They were told to leave, and they didn't leave, and I think that was what prompted the police brutality.
Yeah, one of them ended up getting a nightstick to the head that split his skull open. And then he was brought into the police headquarters. And when Malcolm heard about this, he sort of got all of the brothers of the New York Temple together, and they all just kind of stood outside the police station, sort of making this silent, nonviolent, I don't want to say protest exactly, but, they were a presence that was noticed. And they sort of waited there until they could get in and find out what was going on with the brother that was inside the station, and until they were able to get him sent to the hospital to get his wounds looked at.
Right, because he went in and saw him and saw the state he was in, and told the police officer, like, this man needs to be in a hospital. Yeah. Yeah.
And then said later that he ended up getting like a metal plate put in his head, was how bad the damage had been. But having all of these black members of the Nation of Islam make their little stand outside of the police headquarters got them a significant amount of press coverage, and people started kind of showing some interest and discovering them.
Well, not just press coverage, also just people on the street seeing.
True. Yeah, absolutely.
Like a group of black men standing up for, a black person in custody, having a show of support, standing in solidarity, and they had quite by the time they had reached the hospital where the brother was sent. They said that there was the group of the members of the Nation of Islam, but also a large group of just curious black folk who had never seen anything like that before, right? And not only the news coverage, but just the visual of it in real life as well, right? Like,
yeah, I imagine at that time that would be quite a like an image that you've never seen before and don't know quite what to make of it.
mm-hmm.
That actually, I have seen the movie Malcolm X many years ago, and there are little subtle moments in the book where I am reminded of scenes from the movie, and this is one of them. I remember that scene in the movie where they're all sort of standing lined up outside of the police precinct. But the increased awareness of the Nation of Islam kind of carries us into chapter 14, which is called Black Muslims, because that chapter opens with sort of even more publicity on the way, because there is someone wants you to do sort of a television documentary about the church, and someone else is working on a book about the church.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, there was the video. The book,
Mike Wallace, I think, was doing a TV special.
But there was also, I think, before that, the Reader's Digest article was a big one.
Yeah, well, no, it was the big media came after the TV special and the book, because the TV special, the TV special comes out and was called "The Hate That Hate Produced."
Yeah. And the word that everybody grabbed onto on that was hate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that point, the Nation of Islam starts getting some backlash from churches, mm-hmm. From the white community, and also from black Christians.
As Malcolm X described them as the house black people.
Yeah, or the 20th century Uncle Thomas. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then following that, the book comes out called The Black Muslims of America, which the term Black Muslims kind of ends up sticking somewhat to Malcolm's frustration, because he wanted them to just be referred to as Muslims.
Yeah.
And it's sort of in the wake of the backlash of those two things that the media storm really kicks up. That, yeah, there's the Reader's Digest article, there's probably Time and Life, and mm-hmm. now Malcolm is getting brought onto television programs constantly, and he finds himself kind of reaching back to when he was in prison, when he started kind of doing debates while he was in prison. That was sort of his only real experience with that kind of a back and forth with somebody. But he was going in sort of very prepared and trying to, always calculate what the other guy's argument would likely be, so he'd be able to come in and take it down right from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And how he found, television programs would do such a kind of insulting almost job of introducing him, that he crafted his own introduction that he would sort of cut them off with.
He said he would practice it in the car. He's like, this is what I'm going to say. And then, yeah.
This is from the book. The program hosts would start with some kind of dice-loading, non-religious introduction for me. It would be something like, "And we have with us today the fiery, angry Chief Malcolm X of the New York Muslims." I made up my own introduction, at home or driving my car. I practiced until I could interrupt a radio or television host and introduce myself. "I represent Mr. Elijah Muhammad, the spiritual head of the fastest-growing group of Muslims in the Western Hemisphere. We who follow him know that he has been divinely taught and sent to us by God himself. We believe that the miserable plight of America's 20 million black people is the fulfillment of divine prophecy. We also believe the presence today in America of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, his teachings among the so-called Negroes, and his naked warning to America concerning her treatment of these so-called Negroes is all the fulfillment of divine prophecy. I am privileged to be the minister of our Temple No. 7 here in New York City, which is part of the Nation of Islam under the divine leadership of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I would look around at those devils and their trained black parrots staring at me while I was catching my breath and I had set my tone. But there was also an interesting bit earlier on from the period where he's sort of doing the telephone interviews. Again, this is from the book. The reporters would try their utmost to raise some good white man whom I couldn't refute as such. I'll never forget how one practically lost his voice. He asked me, did I feel any white man had ever done anything for the black man in America? I told him, yes, I can think of two. Hitler and Stalin.
Right.
The black man in America couldn't get a decent factory job until Hitler put so much pressure on the white man. And then Stalin kept up the pressure. Which is just okay.
That's a really good way to shut down that sentiment.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was a hot take.
Because I mean, how do you come back to that? Right? You know, it's you think that you've given him something. You're like, you know, you can't say that there's no good white people. You can't say that. Right. That's the question that they're asking. And he comes back. He's like, well, you know, but he comes back with the good white people as the bad, like the worst.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And he also has a reason for saying that. He's not just saying like, yeah, you know, Hitler and Stalin, whatever. You know, he's actually given reasons why the existence and the, you know, the actions of these people have benefited black people in America. How do you? It's hard to argue that. It really does. Like you say, like they lose their voice. It's like how do you come back from that? And it comes back to his understanding of history, like his being very very well read on the, you know, those situations. And yeah, no, that was.
Well, and being an incredibly skilled speaker too. Like I think.
Oh yeah.
The part in this chapter that shows him, you know, having those conversations with the reporters who were trying to sort of paint the Nation of Islam as this very negative group, and to see how he responds and how he tackles their questions. He's clearly, you know, it was clearly a very, very gifted speaker.
Yeah, absolutely. No, very, very influential person, very well read, very thoughtful. I think. I mean, I don't agree with everything that he said so far in the book, like understandably for me. But I've never once questioned his him being genuine. He's always been. It feels like everything that he does and says, it comes from a very genuine place, a very thoughtful place. Yeah, no, I definitely have a lot of respect for this man after reading up like to where we are. What can you say about the guy? Very, very brilliant debater, very brilliant speaker, very just thoughtful person.
And I think even too, when it comes to, you know, we were talking the other day about some of the elements of the Nation of Islam that are maybe a little bit out there, like the idea that, you know, white men are literal devils. You can still
created by a geneticist. What was it, 6,000 years?
Yeah.
Before.
But you can almost look at some of those beliefs and even and find yourself going like, I can see how someone in the position that he would have been in could find those ideas meaningful, and to get some kind of a sense of profound purpose from it.
And even believable, you know, you're going to look at the things that you've been through and learn about the things your ancestors have been through. And what's more believable, that a regular human being is just capable of being that awful, or that this type of being was created specifically to create pain? You know, I can definitely understand how he would believe that that this white person, the white person that white people that he understood to be a creation. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
But I mean,
if you don't believe that they've been created, then you believe that just regular people are capable of such evil, which is almost harder to believe.
But he even mentions in an earlier chapter, looking at a book on genetics. I can't remember who it was by, but I looked at the name of the guy up, and he's considered sort of the founder of the concept of genetics.
Okay.
And in that book, it talked about how white people could only have come from black people because white is like the white gene is recessive, which I'm going to throw out there. I don't know if that is still considered biologically true, but Malcolm X wouldn't have had access to the knowledge and the science that we have now. So if that's what was in, a biology book that was sort of being used to sort of teach genetics at that time, there's certainly, some scientific support for just the general concept.
Yeah.
That, black was the original race and you could only ever get a white person from a black person. So yeah, I mean, I can certainly see how he would have been drawn to those beliefs and how, why he would want to situate himself within that religion and sort of try to help it spread as he did.
Well, and it's a religion that, protects black people, which is, and as he says often in the chapters that we're reading, Jesus is the blue-eyed, blonde-haired person's God, right? And that's also like, yeah, Jesus wasn't white.
Oh,
and he argues that, and like, absolutely, he wasn't, but
that picture of him that so many North Americans have in their minds, I think, does help.
It's a representation,
that white superiority.
It's a representation of themselves, right? Yeah. It's a mirror of themselves, and when
this is us, not you.
Yeah, and they force that on colored people, and colored people have, like you said, the Christians, the colored Christians have been worshiping a God that does not represent themselves, and whereas the Nation of Islam does offer them the opportunity, whether I agree with everything that the Nation of Islam taught or not, it gives people an opportunity to look at God as a person that they can relate to, rather than a person other than them who, and that creates a dichotomy too, like, maybe not a dichotomy, maybe that's not the right word, but if, and he does express this, when a black person worships a white God, he begins to worship the white person as well, the person that reflects that God, right? So it's one thing for a white person to want to worship a God that represents themselves, but it's another thing to force that representation onto a colored person. Does that make sense?
Well, and he also talks about how the Christian religion's concept of rewards in the next life,
right?
Kind of allows for black people to feel it's okay to not get what they should be getting in this life, right? To be more accepting of their position.
And he often says, while the black people are promised heaven in the afterlife, white people experience and enjoy heaven on earth in their lifetime. Right? Yeah.
Anyway,
there's so many layers to this. So many layers. It's not a cut and dry thing. It's not a yes or no, true or false. There's a lot going on here.
The back half of this chapter kind of spends a good chunk of time breaking down kind of a step-by-step, really minute look at... Because at this point in the story, Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X and bunches of people are traveling from city to city, having these huge rallies.
I never got to the rally part, so you are educating me as you continue.
Like I said, I don't have a whole lot to say about this because it is very much a look at the really a really detailed look at how these rallies went down. So this is who would speak first. Mm-hmm. This is what Malcolm X would say. This is when Elijah Muhammad would come up and what he would say. I will note that originally the rallies were they only permitted black people at the rallies.
Right. Yeah.
And he noted how big a deal that was to finally have this moment where, black people were doing something, then they were able to choose to keep white men out of it. And then gradually, they did kind of open it. They would have a little section of the audience that was set aside for white people. Mm-hmm. Initially, I think they were letting in sort of scholars, some journalists, but then, expanding it to just sort of anybody who might want to drop by. Again, it was still, a fairly small portion of, the arena or whatever that they were speaking in. But they did eventually start sort of letting some people in to see what the rallies were about and see what was going on. Mm-hmm. And then, kind of as the chapter closes, the year is 1961. They had plans for a $20 million Islamic center they were going to build. So obviously, at that point, they had grown pretty substantially. Like they've clearly got money. And then there is, as was in some earlier chapters, a hint that there's going to be some conflict coming up between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. And given that the next chapter is called Icarus, it does seem like maybe some things are going to turn around. Icarus, of course, being the story of the man who had wings on his feet, I think? They were attached with wax, and he flew too close to the sun. I don't know if they were on his
wings, but yeah, he had wings made of feathers and wax. Yeah, he flew too close to the sun.
He flew too close to the sun. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
sorry to oversimplify that.
That's okay. Overlapped. Yeah, you overlapped me trying to oversimplify it. That's all.
He flew really close to the sun, and that didn't go so well for him.
I don't know why I thought it was on his feet. I don't know why I have that picture in my head.
I'm pretty sure it was just straight up wings on his arms. Well, why on his feet? I'm curious now. Why did you think they were on his feet?
I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking of Prince Namor in the Marvel universe. He's got weird little wings on his feet for some reason.
Okay.
Maybe that's what I'm getting it from. I don't know, man.
Icarus. Now, does that, do you think that has to do with himself, Malcolm X, or Elijah? Have you read it? You haven't read it yet, have you?
I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
That,
like, which one flew too close to the sun?
That's a really, really, really good question. I'm going to guess it's Elijah Muhammad.
I would think so too, because like as of now, Malcolm's been very much like you say, supporting role, very steadfast in his belief that Elijah is true to his word, that he is the word of, it's interesting though, because like Elijah doesn't say that he is himself, the prophet. He's always kind of up to this point separated himself from that, but placed W.D. Fard, this person who I don't think anybody that Malcolm knows has ever met other than Elijah. Like you say, secondhand, right?
Yeah.
But also, I think that Malcolm also does disagree with Elijah's methods in some ways. You know, Elijah preaches patience, right? Elijah preaches, you know, the slow growth. You know, that's what his belief was for the Nation of Islam for a long time. When Malcolm was trying to, you know, speed things up, he wanted things to be faster. He wanted things to be, you know, a little more intense. And so it could be Malcolm X. Maybe he just took things too far, and Elijah didn't like that, and he fell from the grace of Elijah. Could be, but like you say, I also think that, yeah, probably.
Well, I'm basing it on what we were saying earlier about when Malcolm's brother was excommunicated, and how Malcolm said that it was for something that they'd later find out that Elijah Muhammad had been doing as well.
Right.
And that's got me thinking that that's going to be the thing. Like, you know,
there's got to be some fall coming.
He's the rising star of the Nation of Islam, and now something's going to happen that's going to, you know, melt those wings.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
No, you know what? Yeah. Like, he's really foreshadowed that for sure. That there's something coming that's going to make us question the integrity of Elijah Muhammad for sure. Yeah, I guess we'll find out next time.
Yeah. And so I think for next week's pages, especially since we're going to have 2 weeks to read, but I think that should get us through to the end of the book, not including the epilogue.
Okay.
So that's 15, 16, 17, 18, 19.
So 19 is the last chapter?
Not counting the epilogue, yes.
Okay.
And that's about 150 pages.
15, 16, 17, 18. Okay. Yep.
At least 150 pages by my e-readers count. And we've been averaging about 140 per episode. So I think that's good.
Yeah.
And then my hope is that the episode after that, we can discuss the epilogue and maybe also try to have a viewing of the movie before that recording, and we can include a conversation about that as well. How
yes,
do you feel about that?
I would love that because I have not seen the movie.
Yeah,
and I fucking love Denzel Washington. Long time.
Yeah.
Oh, he's so good, so good.
Yeah.
Okay, but
and I think it would be, like I said, it's been a long time since I've seen it, so I would like to see it not just from, you know, an older man's perspective, because I would have been very young.
Right.
Not like a child, but just like, you know, when you're 20 something, you're like, oh, whatever, I don't care about this. But also from having read the book as well. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, no, I definitely, it's been something that I've kind of like thought about doing, but have been holding off on because I figured it would be a part of this podcast. So, yeah, looking forward to watching the movie for sure.
But I think that'll do it for this week. Anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, sorry for being a scatterbrained fucking mess this week.
We'll forgive you. We'll forgive you. You mostly got through the reading this time, so.
Yeah, I got through the reading, but then when it came to like discussing the reading, I was like, you know, yeah, okay.
No, you were fine. You're brilliant.
Yeah, no.
Okay, as always, folks, thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Why don't you go read a fucking book?
Read a fucking book. God damn it.